President NASSCOM and member Scientific Advisory Council to Prime Minister to deliver the keynote address.
Thank you. Mr. Lakshminarayan, Chairman of the Board of ICT, ACT and board members, Mr. Khanna, Principal Secretary, Tamil Nadu Government for ICT and Power, participants and invitees to ICT, ACT Bridge, good morning, and let me say how delighted I am to be here. I don't say this as a formality, I say this for two very genuine reasons. The first is I'm always happy to be back in this city. I grew up and studied here like Ganesh. And you know, when I went to the north, my North Indian friends often refer to me yet as a Madrasi because I grew up in what was then Madras, and you know that. So my language sometimes gives that away. I yet remember talking to friends when we were first visiting the US, and a colleague of mine also was from this part of the country. And we used to speak to each other in particular. They would say, hey, I know you guys are speaking English, but I can't understand a word, unlike when you speak to us. And as many of you would know, if you grew up in this part of the country, you tend to speak very fast. And you know, my American friends in particular have difficulty in that. They like to speak word by word, sentence by sentence. We don't speak like that here. So special pleasure to be in Chennai. The second reason is more professional, and I'm extremely pleased that ICT, ACT has taken off as it has. I was involved in some very small way in the days I was with NASSCOM in the genesis of this. And I'm extremely happy to see how well it's grown, developed, and the kind of things it's doing, much of which I've learned and heard about and got feedback from people. And to see a program like this with, you know, a auditorium so full and with so much content, and particularly to see the kind of people who are involved with this, those sitting on the dais, many of them here, those who are speaking today, I think it's a reflection of where the ICT, ACT Academy is and where it's heading to. This morning I thought I'd briefly share a few thoughts with you about broadly the IT industry, but more specifically what kind of issues there are and what are the things that the ICT Academy might continue to do and how important it is for both this industry and particularly for young people looking for opportunities in the country. Ganesh gave an excellent overview. I don't think I've heard such a nice summary for a long, long time of how the industry has evolved and grown and the different stages of it. And I want to pick up just a couple of points from there and then refer to what Lakshmi talked about in terms of what are the kinds of things that are happening now. You know, first, I think that in today's world, and this is across the board, in the old days, being educated meant that you were knowledgeable and could in some sense practice the 3 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic, the 3 R's of what education is. I think today that's inadequate. Today to the 3 R's, you have to complement with 3 C's. And those are additional knowledge that every educated person must have, which are knowledge about computers, communication, and collaboration. And I'll come to a moment on why all are critical. I don't have to tell you about computers, but I'll tell you about the others in a moment. The other part of the critical thing in today's world is that while we yet recognize education as being a good in itself, it's good to have people educated. I think that must be an aspiration for any country, that all its citizens must go through a high level of education. But there is today another dimension of education, particularly in a country like ours, and that is the employment. It's not enough that, you know, our universities, colleges, schools provide education. It's equally important that those who spend many, many years, time and money in this must find themselves employable. And I think this is a responsibility which the education system must take on in collaboration with industry, that those who leave the portals of our education system, they must be employable. It's not that they go through a good education and learn something, but they're not able to be employable, which is different from finding employment. That depends on a number of circumstances. I think that's a critical part. And this is where, if I may say with some danger in an audience like this, which consists of very, very eminent educationists, many of you have spent your careers in education, I must say that the education system, particularly over the last few decades, has not quite succeeded. And I talk of the system as a whole, not of particular institutions or colleges. It has turned out a large number of people. It's grown phenomenally, and that's something to be proud of. But in the process, somewhere, it has not kept its link with the real world. And the result is that in many, many cases, the people who leave our educational institutions, the people who leave our higher educational institutions, having spent 15, 16 years of education, 12 years in school, 3 or 4 years at the university level, are not employable. And that's the stark fact. Industry says that yes, you produced a graduate, and yes, he has knowledge, he has a certain degree of skills, but the kind of knowledge and skills he has are not something I can use. Either I can't take him or her at all, or I take the brighter ones in, and then I put them through my own process of education for another 4 months, 6 months, 7 months. And then the student wonders, that if I went through 16 years of education, why do I have to go through another 6 or 7 months? I can understand going through some amount of, training with regard to the particular company and its ethos, with regard to the products of that company, but why do I have to go back and learn a little bit of, computer programming? Why do I have to go back and learn even mathematics often? And why do I have to go and learn communication skills when I should have learned those through my 16 years in education? And I think this is something that those of us involved, those of you involved very deeply and directly in education, and those of us who are indirectly involved in some way, must think and ponder about. Fortunately, in the last few years, and I would only say last few years, maybe 5 years, 7 years, there has been a change. And a change in terms of first a deep recognition and awareness that somewhere the system is not quite working, and more importantly, in certain cases, there has been a recognition that this change needs to be translated into specific actions to be able to take care of this problem. And that is why I am so pleased and happy at what the ICT Academy has been doing, because this is one of the critical things. And the critical thing is, yes, that we have got to get the students up there, but there's no better way of doing this than to make sure that those who teach the students, those whom they respect, those who carry education to them, are the ones who begin to know what is it that industry is looking for. And lest you feel that I'm blaming the education system alone, I want to say that a bigger part of this responsibility in some way has been industries. Industry keeps saying that we can't get people who are employable, that only 25% of the people who graduate from our engineering colleges are directly employable, and I have said this myself in different fora. But then what is the responsibility of industry? Have they conveyed to the education system what exactly is it that they need? Have they conveyed what are the contents of what they need? Have they tried to work with the education system, with the teachers and the institutions to say, this is the kind of thing you might want to do in your curriculum, this is the kind of special things you might want to include, this is what we would be looking for now and 2 years and 5 years from now? No, I don't think the industry has done that in the past. And again, that is where an institution like the ICT Academy, which acts, and as this program is named aptly, a bridge between what industry is looking for, what industry needs, what are they going to be looking for in future, and what the academic institutions are doing and what they need to do. I think that's the critical part of what this whole bridge program is there about. I also want to share with institutions, and particularly the heads of institutions, many of you are heads of your institutions here, the fact that in a situation of pressure, it is often difficult to say, how can I spare a teacher to go out for what is a good training program for 3 days, 5 days, 1 week, 2 weeks. And I recognize this problem because this is faced even in organizations. Organizations do some amount of training for their own people. By organizations now I mean companies. They do training for their people, and they recognize that their people need to be occasionally trained, to be going through new refresher courses, to go to workshops, to upgrade their skill levels. And yet they feel, no, I can't release people now. I'm under too much pressure. I need to deliver something to a client. The customer is breathing down my neck. But the fact is that you can't sacrifice your long-term interests and your sustainability for immediate short-term gain. And I would urge those of you who head education institutions to also keep that in mind. The difficult as it may be for you to spare your teachers to go out to a workshop or a training program for a few days or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, sometimes more, it is a necessary part of what you need to do to make sure that your institution continues to be sustainable in what it does, that your teachers are upgraded and understand what is the real requirement of the market, that they go through refresher courses which recharge their batteries and bring them back fresh with new ideas and relevant ideas to include in their teaching, in their curriculum, in their pedagogy. I think these are key elements which we need to continue to keep in mind. And I stress these as I know these are the operational problems. I've talked to many of the institutions. And they tell me this, yes, we recognize the need for a refresher course for our teachers. We recognize that if they go and spend some time in a company, in industry, if they go to a training course where there are industry people on the faculty, they will begin to understand what industry needs. They'll begin to build links with them. It will help our students. But I can't spare anybody now. The teaching load is too much. There's a lot of pressure on them. But I think that's the part that you need to take care of. And I'm sure it's on your minds, but I think you need to continue to do that. A separate aspect, and I come back to what I said earlier about the 3 C's, and I said computers is obvious, but I want to spend a moment on communication and then a little bit on collaboration. Time and again we find that the communication skills of our students, even the very bright ones, are not adequate. And that happens because of our traditional system of education, changed in many of your institutions and changing rapidly around the country, I realize, but yet the traditional system continues to be such that, as I've often said, only half facetiously, the only 2 times a student has to articulate, speak to pass and test is first when he or she is, 3 or 4 years old, when you go for admission to kindergarten. And that's tough, as those of you who are children will know. The parents are sweating, the child is there, and since the child can't write, the teacher from the kindergarten, which is highly valued, shows something and says, what is this? And you're hoping your child says apple instead of orange, or what color is this, red, blue, green, and the child has to articulate, because that's the only way they'll pass the test. So that's the first time they have to articulate to pass any test. The next time they have to articulate to pass any test in any professional way is if they do their PhD. Probably 20 years or 25 years later, when they go for a PhD and there's a viva and there's an examiner in front and you have this 300-page thesis, and the viva consists of asking, saying, explain, tell me. Nothing else. We are not required to pass any other test by articulating, speaking, explaining, arguing your point of view, defending what you've said. And these are critical things in the industry today. Irrespective of where you are, you go to meet a customer, you have to go and sell something. If you're in a purely technical job, somebody calls up and you have to explain what you did, understand what the customer is saying, interact back and forth. You have to interact with your teammates.